Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh yeah, I once was lost, but right now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh yes, I once was lost, but right now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see. Hi, I'm Nadine, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Music in the Spiritual Realm. Thank you for tuning in to part 2 of the amazing life of John Newton, the composer of the most popular hymn in the English language, Amazing Grace. Now, this is part 2, so if you have not watched part 1, stop this video, watch part 1, and then return to part 2 so you can enjoy the entirety of the story. So here we are. John was kidnapped against his will by the press military, taken aboard a naval ship, HMS Harwick, a 50-gun ship with 350 crew members. John was outraged at the thought of not being able to see Polly. Her actual name was Mary, but he gave her the nickname Polly, a young girl he fell in love with at first sight and was planning to marry. John was angry, and he felt as though God had singled him out for punishment because of his sins. And John turned his back on his faith. Well, while aboard the ship, John worked hard, but he did it begrudgingly. He did it resentfully. The men and his superiors noticed his hard work. When his superiors found out that John's father was a captain in the merchant navy, they recommended a promotion for John. John was promoted to officer's rank. So now he has great responsibilities and subordinates. And the anger that grew within him more and more each day, he took it out on his men. He lashed out at them. Well, because of the hard-fought battles and the skirmishes, the ship had been badgered by repeated blows from the war. Captain Carteret docked the ship at a naval base in Plymouth, England, and he gave the men shore leave. However, he warned everyone, "You must return here at the designated time. If you do not return at the designated time that is set, you will be considered a deserter, and you will be punished accordingly. John devised a plan. He thought, this gives me an opportunity to visit Polly. Now, already warned, explained, you cannot desert your men, you cannot desert the ship. Officer's rank. John took a chance anyway, not realizing the consequences he would pay and suffer for being considered a deserter. Well, on his way to see Polly, he was arrested, court-martialed. John was stripped of his rank, demoted. He was beaten. He was tied to a post on the ship. It's a tall pole where they would tie anyone that needed to be punished. They would tie your hands to this post. They laid him on the ground and they whipped him on the back. I believe he got 12 lashes. Now, you know, those whips, when they hit you with those whips, those whips would break the skin. Those forceful blows will cause your skin to break. John was placed below the ship. For 7 days, he was fed bread and water. The men were ordered not to speak to John. Do not give him any favors or any rations. Don't offer him no food. Don't offer him anything. Do not speak to him. And this was for 7 days. Captain Carteret was disgraced by the choices John made after being warned. Well, while passing by a civilian vessel, a slave ship, Captain Carteret decided he was going to get rid of the crewmen on the ship that were disgraceful. So he traded 3 crewmen on his ship to the civilian ship, the civilian slave ship called the Levant. He traded them out for 2 slaves that would be his gunmen on his ship. So now John has fallen to a new low. Once an officer's rank on the Royal Navy ship, now a slave on a civilian vessel. So he has a new captain now. This man was hardcore. Captain Phelps. For some reason, he despised John. He did not like John at all. He berated John. He degraded him. He said the worst of the worst that he could think of to John during their time on this ship. Well, John, he liked the crew that was on the ship. He liked the men. He took well to them. However, he still had this anger in him. But his anger now, he expelled it out on the captain. Yeah, the captain didn't like him. He didn't like the captain. Now, Captain Phelps had a physical impairment. He walked with a cane. One of his legs looked like it was slightly bent. He had some other ailments going on. And John used to mock him and crack jokes about his impairment. And he would do this to the crew, the slaves on the ship. Well, one day while they were sitting and eating below the deck, John decided to sing this song criticizing Mr. Phelps. And what in the world did he do that for? I mean, he entertained these men on the ship. And he sung this song. And I mean, he was enjoying it too. Criticizing Mr. Phelps' impairments. Well, Mr. Phelps walked by and he listened to what John was saying and, okay. You want to crack jokes about my physical impairment? I'll fix that. Well, the next stop was going to be at an island called the Banana Island. Mr. Phelps had already made up his mind. I'm getting ready to trade you out to a slave owner on this island. When they landed at the Banana Island, John was traded out to a slave owner, a white man, married to an African woman, a princess. His new slave owner was Mr. Campbell, and his wife, Mrs. Campbell, and they called her P.I., P-E-Y-E. I believe that was her first name. So here, John is now a slave on the Banana Island. Oh, here's the worst part. Mr. Campbell, his new slave owner, his wife, the African princess, always dreamed of having a white slave. Can you imagine that? That was a dream. She desired a white slave for a long time. And Mr. Campbell said to John, "Me wife have always wanted a white slave. And her dream has come true." Woo! Oh, it gets worse from here. Mrs. Campbell, P.I., she treated John very poorly. She treated him as low as you can treat someone. John was fed just enough food to stay alive. Just enough that he wouldn't starve to death. Now, the native slaves on this island, they slept in huts. At least they had a hut to sleep in. John slept on the ground. John wore the same clothes until they were tattered. They were literally tearing apart, tearing up. Yes. And Mrs. Campbell, P.I., she would tease John. She made him do meaningless jobs. She would take food and she would pretend to hand it to him. And when he reached for it, she would snatch it back. Reach for it, she would snatch it back. And she had this laugh. Well, one day she teased him with the food back and forth, and then she just took the tray of fruits and she just threw it to the ground. When she threw it to the ground, I mean, he was gulping it up. I mean, he was so hungry. She had John to do meaningless tasks just to get a kick out of it and laugh. Okay, John, she called him Newton. She would have John to take objects, let's say just little wood pieces. Take them from one location to the next. Stack them up over here. Now, remind you, she was barely giving him anything to eat, so he didn't have any strength, Anyway, once John has completed that task, she would say, okay, good. Now take it back where you got it from and put it there exactly like it was. And she would crack up laughing. Well, as time went on, John eventually gained strength in his mind and in his body. One day while he was doing some work in Mr. Campbell's brick house, he came across a geometry book. He took the book. He studied geometry. He learned it. He mastered it. One day while laying down on the ground, John looked up and he gazed at the stars and the constellations. He saw an image of a ring that reminded him of a dream he had long ago. And in that dream, he was told that when you need this ring the most, in other words, when you're at your lowest point in life, I'll bring it to you. So he remembered that dream when he saw that image of the ring. Well, there was a day where John was writing diagrams and working out equations in the sand. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell walked by, and Mr. Campbell asked him, "What are you doing, John? What is that? You know what this is?" John said, "Yes, sir. I taught myself." And he looked at John and he said, "You might be of some use after all." Now, prior to this, John was told that he was useless, even as a slave. Well, Mr. Campbell took notice of John writing these diagrams and doing calculations in the sand. He decided to test him. He gave John a test. John passed the test. Now, before this took place, John learned how to calculate the latitude and the longitude of this island he was on called the Banana Island. He learned this through studying this geometry book. So now he passed the test. Equations, calculations. And Mr. Campbell was very pleased. He told John, "I have a factory in Kittam." And John looked at him and said, "Factory?" He said, "Yeah, it's my trading slave post." He said, "My brother is running the company for me, and he needs someone that's good in math. You will go there. You will serve him now." Well, the good thing about this is John was freed from slavery. When he went to Kittam, Kittam, his brother treated John with respect. John was so happy to be in Kittam. He said, "I'm no longer a slave in rags. I have food. I have clean clothing. I have shelter. I'm respected. And I even have women." He was even invited to some of their festivals. Well, he sat at one of the festivals and he enjoyed himself. He thought about Polly, but he had soon gave up any hope of ever returning to England. In his mind, he said, well, at least I'm not a slave anymore, and I have all that I need. I will perhaps marry a native. Perhaps I'll die here. Perhaps I'll be buried here. Unbeknown to John, that after his disappearance, John's father had commissioned a captain by the name of Archibald Golther to find John and bring him home at all costs, at any cost. Well, so this took a long time because years had passed. But he located John in Kittam Sierra, Leone. And he said to John, your father had commissioned me to find you. I looked everywhere. I went here, I went there. He told him where. I searched for you. And finally he found John. He said, I'm here to take you home. John said, I never thought I would see England again. I thought I was going to die right here. And he said to Archibald, and I'm paraphrasing, if I believed in God, I would say his hands brought you here. And he said that because he felt like after everything I went through, I'm not going to make it back home. You know what Captain Archibald told him? Believe it. In other words, it was God. Well, John was prepared for the voyage back home on the Greyhound ship. Now, during their voyage, it was a long journey. John came across a book titled The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. That's who the book was written by, Thomas Kempis. He figured, I'll read the book, pass the time. This is a long journey. I got to do something. John began reading this book. The words in this book touched John. It touched him extremely. John was reading and he said, suppose the words in this book are true. Suppose this is true. Suppose God was the driving force behind my path, my life, the road that I took, everything that I've gone through, anger, bitterness, lashing out. He had told God, I have nothing to do with you. Before he went through all of this, this is what he looked up and said. But now he's thinking, I turned my back on God, on my faith. Now everything that I've gone through, someone came to rescue me and take me back home. John was so caught up in emotions and evaluating and questioning, wow, I turned my back on my faith. And now here God is rescuing me, bringing me back home. His mother died when he was 6. His father remarried weeks later. His stepmother didn't like him. She placed him in boarding school. He had unsettled anger. He was kicked out of 2 boarding schools. His father decided to take him aboard his ship at 11. He started out as a cabin boy. He learned all the trades of being a captain on a ship. Now he became an officer's rank after being kidnapped to a Navy ship, a military ship for war. Then he wound up being a slave, traded to a slave owner on Banana Island. And then the situation turns around and he's freed from slavery. And now here, this captain is to take me back home. God had to be in this. There is a God. God had to do this. Caught up in his emotions and meditation, he did not realize that the Greyhound ship they were on, he did not realize there was a storm raging so fiercely. When he came to himself, he ran up to the top of the deck. Captain Archibald was trying his best to wheel the ship. It was so forceful. He couldn't. He was knocked unconscious. John took the wheel with all his energy and might. There was nothing he could do with that wheel. The wind, the rain, the storm, it was raging. And remember what I told you. When he was angry with God, the first time, he looked up and he said, I have nothing to do with you. But during this storm, and after reading that book, his whole demeanor changed. He realized, he said it within himself, I'm going to die right here at sea. That same John Newton that told God, I had nothing to do with you. He looked up and he said, save us. Save us. The storm began to cease. Those dark clouds rolled away. John looked back up and he told the Lord, thank you. Thank you. That was the day he marked his conversion. He gave his life to Christ. He no longer doubted if God was real. He knew. Have you ever been through storms in your life? God never turns his back on us. He said in his word, I will never leave you or forsake you. But you got to walk the straight, narrow path. Now, it's not easy and we stray, yes. But don't go so far where you're blinded. And God has to spank you just a little bit. Because his grace and mercy, we never get the punishment we truly deserve for our sins. But he extends his mercy and grace to all of us, to you and to me. John was so thankful he had given his life to Christ. John was converted. And he marked this day, March 10th, 1748. He was converted to evangelical Christianity. Now this is part 2. I will convene with part 3 at a later date. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you along your journey to realize that, number one, this world is not our home, and we're just passing through. But no matter what we go through in life, what we're facing, remember, God's grace is sufficient for you and for me. Remember that He'll never leave you or forsake you. Share this video. Subscribe to my channel. Until part 3, be blessed.